All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our talk. This is 60 Sources and Counting, Unlocking Microservice Integration with dbt and Data Vault. We've got a quick agenda here if you want to reference any of the sections of the presentation later, but nobody likes agendas, so we're just going to skip past that. My name is Brandon Taylor. I've been in data architecture for a little over 10 years, and 1.5 of those years have been with Guild. And just a little fun thing about me, I have 8 chickens, 2 lambs, 2 dogs, 2 cats, and 2 kids back at home. So yeah, it's a little hectic for me.
And I'm Rebecca Berry. About 9 years as a data engineer, been at Guild for 3.5 years. Love to travel, been to 20 plus countries, 5 continents, hopefully more. All right, to start first, we work at a company called Guild, and what is it? We offer furthering education opportunities to working adults. We partner with employers and learning partners across the country, providing furthering education opportunities to the employees at those companies. We have a 3-sided marketplace, and therefore we have an abundance of reporting needs. And so when Guild got started, we're about a 7 or 8-year-old company now. We adopted dbt a few years ago. Before we had dbt, we were just running, we actually, adopting dbt let us move into Snowflake. So we were using a different warehousing solution. We had a lot of kind of like manual SQL scripts. And a few years ago, we adopted dbt, and it was phenomenal. It helped us scale our reporting and analytic capabilities. We didn't have to necessarily rethink all of our underlying data models when we first moved to dbt. It provided us the momentum we needed to move our data warehouse into Snowflake. We were previously in Redshift. The use of macros let us stop repeating ourselves and really sped up our model development. And it streamlined our deployment and orchestration pipeline of all of our models running. These improvements really helped us scale analytics at Guild up until a point.
So when I first got to Guild, we do this nifty thing where for the first couple of weeks you go on this road show to talk to your different stakeholders. What challenges are you having? How can I help you? And just get to know the people that you're going to be working with. And one of the key things that I heard from practically everyone I talked to is at Guild, if you ask 2 developers to give you a report, you're probably going to get 3 different answers for it. Now, other challenges we had. We're a microservice environment, so we had at the time we wrote this presentation, we had about 60 sources. That's probably close to 70, 75 at this point. And we had lots of schema drift as we're breaking down monoliths, as we're turning those into various microservices. Our microservices were changing over time as we added new functionality to them. And it was really difficult for our data teams to manage all of those changes upstream as they were flowing into the warehouse. Someone told me that we were managing the technology's digital exhaust. Additionally, it was hard to find the data that you needed at any given point. There was no conformed dimensions. Effectively, everything was scattered across Snowflake. Again, dbt helped us to get our models into the warehouse, but people were making their own models. It was difficult to use anything that someone else had already built. And so we had this proliferation of lots of models and, again, 2 reports, 3 different answers. And then lastly, no real concept of point-in-time tracking. If our accounting team needed to know what did that report look like that you sent out 6 months ago, we had some incremental models in dbt so we could do bits and pieces of it, but our data was changing so frequently over time and overriding historical data that we didn't have a way to know, as of 6 months ago, what did our data look like. So now, do any of these challenges resonate with anybody? Has anyone ever experienced, I don't know, schema drift? We can't get our history. We don't know what's the source of truth, what's the right model. Yeah, it happens. So, what do? I proposed to the business that we develop a new warehouse solution using Data Vault. Go ahead. And here's a high-level overview of what that looks like today. Effectively, again, lots of sources over there on the far left, And the first thing that we did was we borrowed from the data mesh concept data products. To manage all of that schema drift, we effectively took the concept of ETL and shifted that left into our different domain teams and engineering squads and worked with them to develop our data contracts, effectively saying, in your service, here are the 10, 20, 200 columns that we expect from you for our reporting needs. And we worked with them to define what those models looked like, how they needed to deliver those models, and now they can make any changes that they want to in their service. They can add new tables, break things apart, and as long as they're still maintaining that contract with us and transforming their data into a way that we expect to see it, we're no longer coupled. They can do whatever they need to do, and we still get the data that we need on time. From those data products, we then add that information into our data vault, which we'll dig into more in a moment. But then we also still needed that reporting layer. You can't get away from Kimball. So that's our documented analytics layer here so that teams can get those conformed dimensions and understand what is the source of truth for our various business objects and processes. And then all of that information flows into our various use cases that you see here. So now what is this data vault thing? Data vault is effectively a hub and spoke architecture where you take your key business objects. For us, that's our members, the people that we're helping to provide education benefits to. Learning partners, these are the people that students are attending these classes at. And our various programs are what are they taking at those classes. And this is just an example of 3 of our business objects that we have at Guild. And then off of this hub member, we might have a service that manages location data, a separate service with name and demographic information. And so what we can do is take that central concept of a member in a single table that has all of our member IDs, but no other data. And off of that, we have these spokes, or in Data Vault, they're called satellites, which have information for name, information for demographics. And so what we can do is as our capabilities grow on the engineering side and we get more information, we can enrich those business objects with additional data without having to rewrite our models every single time to manage that new information. We can just say, add that satellite, add another satellite. And then we have business satellites off of that for any calculated metrics so that we can have things like enrollment data all available in this one integration layer. I like to say that technology and people are incredibly valuable, but it's really the process that lets you scale all of your capabilities. And Data Vault brought us that process that we needed to help our employees be able to build the objects that they needed in a common way that everyone was able to understand and work with.
So how does Data Vault help? Well, the first thing it did, and perhaps the most important thing that it did, was it forced a conversation on our leadership to define business concepts. So those hubs, those business objects, it forces leadership to say, yes, these members are what we're centralizing our business on, right? It establishes standards. And so we can have business objects, and then we have attributes associated with them. The second most important thing it did was its ability and flexibility to incorporate upstream changes. We have 75 sources and growing to date, 60 when we wrote this title. And as our title, we're able to incorporate changes regularly with Data Vault. We have a satellite per source system, so a new source system comes online, just slap a new satellite onto a business object. The architecture is also insert only. It is based off of a hash diff, a primary key and hash diff. And so when changes to data and upstream sources are made, we can calculate the hash diff and we just do an insert only with a timestamp. So we can kind of manage as of dates much more straightforward.
So now let's dig into an example. Quick disclaimer, all of this is mock data. Don't come after me in for security. So on the far side, on the far left here, we have our primary key. This is a hash of whatever your business identifier is for your data. The point in a hash, it just keeps the information anonymized if you want to be able to surface it but not show actual identifiers. Also, it helps for performance reasons. The hash diff is effectively all of the information from our source system concatenated together and then hashed so that we only have a single field that we have to check on for any changes. If the primary key is the same, but the hash diff is different, we know that something in the data has changed, so we add that record in, and you see we have a LDTS, load date timestamp, so that we can detect when did this change occur, and then be able to travel back and see what did that data look like in the past. So this example is just a satellite with name and address information. Let's say this is hanging off of our contact hub for members. And now we have a new system that comes into play. This is from our HR system. Now we also have name data in here, so we have two different sources, and we can work with the business to define which of these should be the source of truth for name. But we also have new data. We have additional contact information. This could be email or phone number, something like that. And so now we have two different satellites hanging off of that contact hub, and those data can change as needed to over time. We can add additional satellites if we have new information from new sources that comes in. And there's no change or rework to our existing satellites. We just add data. Next. From here, we then create what's called a PIT table, or a point-in-time table. And this table takes all of that satellite information and mashes it together so that we know for satellite 1, what are all of the different load dates. For satellite 2, what are our load dates. And this gives us valid from and valid to. So now we have all of that information on one table that acts as a reference for when did data change per satellite, and with a record for each one of those changes and the effectivity. This then lets us project out to our reporting layer, where now we have a dimension that the teams can query that gives us all of the information from those satellites, again, with valid froms and valid tos, so that we can determine, effectivity at any point in time. But we also have an is current flag, so if all we care about is just what is the data as of today, throw a where clause on there and you've got your data in its current form.
So when is Data Vault not for you? It solves a lot of the problems that Guild faced with ever-changing upstream data sources. But there are times where it's overly complex for what you might be encountering. If you have a low number of source systems, or you're still figuring out your business, meaning you don't know what your business objects really should be, defining the hubs and what attributes should be off of them is really critical to a successful Data Vault implementation. A low number of source systems might not warrant the complexity that Data Vault brings, and or if you have fairly static data, right? The real power for Guild was that Data Vault allowed us to incorporate ever-changing upstream data without needing to rebuild our models. It's an insert-only mechanism. So to drive home the point a little bit more, we're going to go through a brief data modeling exercise, and we're picking something fairly straightforward. We're going to pick modeling data for a school, right? So we have students, we have courses, we have teachers. And in third normal form, which is the typical relational model that powers a lot of operational systems, you'll see here we have a traditional model. We'll have courses, it's got a primary key, which is the ID and some attributes. The students table also has a primary key, and teacher has a primary key. And then we may capture relationship in a student courses table that is a primary key and then a list of foreign keys to kind of map to all the other tables. If we take the similar model and look at the traditional SCAR schema for analytics reporting, we'll have a fact, right? The fact is enrollment. And then we'll have some dimensions that capture, again, the teachers, students, and courses. What we see for Data Vault is that the number of tables explodes to model the same data. So the complexity goes up significantly in terms of just the infrastructure to manage said system. But as we pointed out, there's tremendous value in doing so depending on the business case you have. But what you can see here is our hubs are our three nouns, right? Students, courses, teachers. all of the attributes become satellites. In this example here, let's say we are tracking teachers in 2 different source systems, so we'll have 2 different satellites that are off the teachers. And then the links represent relationships. So in a relational database, all of the foreign key, primary key stuff, that is captured in a link table. So links are relationships between our hubs.
Okay, Brandon, I'm sold. How do I do this darn thing, right? So what does it take to implement Data Vault? I love these 4 steps from a book by John Giles called Elephant in the Fridge. Highly recommend taking a look if you're interested in learning more. But step 1, define how the business sees their data. This is a conversation with leadership to determine what is it that we do here. And this helps you understand what are my hubs, what are my key business objects for my business, and your links, what are the processes where these different objects overlap. So this can be customer purchases a product. So we have customer hub, product hub, and then purchases as our link table. Whatever you're doing in the business, you want to develop these key concepts first and foremost, and then you can start to design your data vault based on that view. So based on our processes in our business and based off of those objects, you can build your various hubs and start to load data in them to determine how do we identify a customer? How do I identify our different products? And then once we have those pillars defined, we can start to enrich that using a bottom-up method, working with our various engineering teams to understand what data do we have about our members? What data do we have about our employer partners? And start to create those satellites off of those objects so that we can enrich our data vault. And then lastly, we want to define the business rules. And this is that part in the business vault area where we determine A plus B equals C, whatever metrics that we're deriving in the warehouse that don't exist anywhere else, and build those as satellites as well so that we're also tracking that information over time. A few more tools. First and foremost, BEAM, Business Event Analytics Modeling. It's out of a book by Lawrence Core called Agile Data Warehouse Design. Also, highly recommend the book. It gives you all the tools that you need to ask the right questions of the business so that you understand, again, what is it that we're doing and what are the processes, the dates, the information that we need to be able to run the business. Data products, again, has helped us tremendously in managing schema drift. I highly recommend taking a look at the Data Mesh book by Samak Dagani. She goes into a lot of great detail on data products in there. DBT, and specifically for us, DBT Vault, which is an extension that you can add onto DBT. It makes building your data vault very simple. All you have to do is define your primary keys, define what needs to go into your hash diff, and then it has macros that can build those objects for you, so you're not having to hand roll your data vault with SQL every time. And lastly, Snowflake, or whatever your cloud data warehouse of choice is. But you're storing a lot of information, you're going to be crunching a lot of numbers. Highly recommend a tool like Snowflake. For us, our team structure, we have a data integration team to help us bring data in. Our data quality team primarily works, again, with those engineering squads to define those those data products. And again, checking for data quality issues throughout our data pipelines. Our reporting team builds the actual data vault as well as our projections out into the reporting layer for star schemas. Architecture. And lastly, but most importantly, business buy-in. You cannot be successful if your business isn't willing to sit down and work with you and talk with you so that you can best understand what is it that you do. I see so many warehouses that are built based off of your source system instead of the business. Anytime I see dim leads to a fact opportunity with dim account, I say, okay, this is a Salesforce shop. I shouldn't be able to tell that. I should be able to tell what your business is, not the systems that you're using. Here's just a quick overview of that BEAM framework that I mentioned. I won't go through all of this, but effectively, this gives you the tools you need to ask the right questions of the business so that you can build your data vault.
And to borrow the slide we had earlier when we were describing Data Vault, this is now repurposed to kind of show where the teams fit as we build this project out. We have data engineers kind of working on the data ingestion layer and the data contract of our data products. We have our business intelligence and data quality teams really building out our hubs, links, sats, our pits, our bridges, and all of the tables within our data vault and then business vault. And then we have our analytics teams. We're still leveraging SCAR schema. We still have dimensions and facts, and we have a whole analytics engineering department kind of working in that space that is then feeding Looker and the rest of our downstream systems.
Thank you all so much for attending. I would love to hear what questions you have, and if we can't get to all of them, I'm happy to stay around until they kick me out of here, and then we can chat in the hall. So, questions, comments? Thank you.
Great presentation. Two questions. So when you move to the data vault, who owns the data vault? How do you deal with collisions among some of your localized data marts, or I guess satellites as you call them, in terms of driving the overall enterprise data warehouse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say for the most part, architecture owns the conceptual version, so the ERDs and understanding what satellites go where. I do a lot of that work, but then the actual build of the data vault is primarily with our analytics teams. They're the ones that, I feed them the requirements for these different satellites need to hang off of these hubs, or we need to develop these new hubs or links, whatever it is, and then they go out and build that. I will say, as I've tried to become less of a bottleneck, I'm pushing more of that towards those analytics teams. And so they're also starting to work with the business, having those beam conversations with them. And then I will say recordings are your best friend. So I'll have them record those sessions, I can review them, and then get information out that way. We collaborate and work together to build those models, because I want to make sure, we're an education company, so I want to make sure the teams understand how to build this as well. That's effectively how we go about defining ownership.
Thank you. With you gain flexibility to expand, which is great, particularly if you don't know what your target model is going to be, data model. But you increase the overhead, yeah. So particularly in the raw data world, you have a lot more objects, quite simple jobs to be created. So how did you deal with the increased, cost of running a lot of jobs? And simple jobs, but large volume of it. And I noticed that it's not the data engineers maintaining those jobs, so it's a different team. Did you have any automation in addition to dbt Vault?
So I'm happy to, yeah. I guess a few things. It's an insert-only architecture. So because we're not running upstarts or anything like that, the load is a little bit less in terms of the processing of data into the data vault. That said, the delivery of data into the data vault, we have a lot of automation from upstream teams that are delivering the data products, and that's all automated via AWS Glue. And we have a data ingestion pipeline that runs data contracts upstream that's also automated and running in Amazon as well before we write data into the warehouse.
I'll say in prior implementations, I have seen decreases in cost by moving to Data Vault, because you don't have to process your entire source system every single time. If you have some good CDC processes, you're only checking on changes to your data, and Data Vault's just storing everything else. And storage is cheap. It's really the compute that we're worried about. So not having to drop the whole warehouse and run it every time we run dbt is a huge help.
Yeah, the insert only makes it so every satellite associated to a hub maintains history over time.
Thank you for the presentation. As an analytics engineer, I feel a bit far away from who I think the business would be to have that conversation, the initial one about what your core objects are. How did you folks approach that? Maybe you're not that far away from the C-suite, or please elaborate.
I think this is why it's important to have architecture involvement, because I do understand, I've been there, and it's really hard to get time with the higher ups in the organization. So, I mean, effectively me just banging on doors and saying, hey, if we want to do this right, I need to talk to you, helped initially. I also did a lot of road shows after that initial 2-week conversation with my stakeholders. Once I ideated on let's go with Data Vault, I built a couple of presentations, either at a pretty technical level for some folks or at a very high level for the more business savvy folks, and then just started showing those presentations out to anywhere I could, team meetings, leadership meetings, as I effectively, if you can get some grassroots movement that, hey, this is a good idea, it slowly starts to filter up in the organization, until eventually I was talking with the VPs and C-suite, and they said, yeah, let's do this. And I got time with them. So, start small and be the change.
I've also had success starting to diagram out a problem. It's like I know there's a problem, but I haven't been able to find words or really know how to talk to, so I start diagramming. Like, this is how I see our data warehouse working and our ingest and our outflow, and then kind of more of a grassroots kind of socializing that diagram until I've been able to, get people to start taking a look at, hey, this is how it works, but you see how, like, when you start to be able to diagram, you can see a lot of holes or gaps.
Hi, thank you. So it seems like you need to have a lot of buy-in from the other data teams as well when it comes to doing Data Vault. It could happen, like if you have everything set up perfectly, but they don't understand how Data Vault is supposed to be working, it becomes a mess very quickly. As far as I know, Data Vault is like a proprietary system that you have to pay the founder in order to get educated in. How did you guys manage with educating the other teams and getting their buy-in?
Yeah, there is a book you can purchase, Accelerate Your Data Warehouse with Data Vault 2.0, I believe is the title. Dan Lindstedt's the author. So read the book, certainly. In order to get certified, you do have to go through his organization, but I've done this before without the certification. We have a bi-weekly reading club at Guild. So every other week, we all meet up and have read the, chapter 1, and then we discuss that information together and answer any questions that folks have. And then next week, chapter 2, chapter 3, and of course that takes some time, but it was effectively a trust me guys at first and just follow my technical requirements as I was providing those to teams. But now that we've, gotten on through the book, people are starting to grasp it much better and able to go off and be more autonomous and build on their own. Lunch and Learns, again, the presentations, especially the technical ones for those data teams so that they really understood how things worked. But it's just a lot of enablement, a lot of education for those folks so that they understand it. You had your hand.
I've worked for 2 large Dutch banks, Data Vault, Rabobank and another bank. And in Europe, there's much more Data Vault, in my opinion, than in the US. I never understood that. But we also suffer from the different interpretations of Data Vault, like Hans Hultgren with his book Ensemble Modeling, who was popular in Holland. And then Lindstedt with Data Vault, with his community, which is very protective. And you're right, he wants you to sell the training. You see lots of discussions. So I think Data Vault itself suffers from ego and those kind of things, but you can, I think, do it very well with the book. Are you also familiar with Patrick Cuba, writing for the Snowflake? I think he also writes a very, although a little bit chaotic book, I think, but he does give a lot of information also on his site. And I was wondering if you more into that school versus the ensemble modeling, because those discussions about link satellites and all those things, you are not talking about that. But this is simple, hubs and sets, but I think if you go more into it, there are much more complex issues as well, which you run into then. Could you tell me something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And another version of that is anchor modeling as well. And my head explodes every time I look at anchor modeling. So just props to anyone that understands it. I completely agree. Data Vault can get wildly complex. I say keep it simple, stick to the book, and adapt to your business needs. In my opinion, I think just sticking to that hub and spoke style of architecture, that's really, using that is really the heart of Data Vault, and avoiding getting too into the weeds on, well, the book says to do it this way. Do what works for you, but, go through the book and understand the basic concepts, and then, adapt your model from there.
And we still have a star schema on the back end of things because we still have analytics and reporting needs, and that is still a good, data model to serve that type of stuff, right? So.
Thank you. So you mentioned having a lot of sources that are basically constantly changing, constantly updating, and I can totally see how the insert-only hash, whatever, lets you all track when those changes are happening, but how do you expose that to the data consumer? So for instance, if a core piece of data is changing, how do you expose those changes to the business user while also maintaining trust in the data?
Great question, and I think that Data Vault really helps with that trust because we can show the business if a data point changes and it's suddenly wildly incorrect, we can show them upstream, well, this is what the data looked like yesterday. Some funny business happened and this record was inserted, and then the upstream team made a correction and now the data are correct again. So I think that side of the historical tracking really helped us with trust. But more specifically to your question on how we surface that information, in our reporting dashboards, or even if we're just running a quick report for someone, we have the ability now to ask them, when do you want to see this data for? Do you want to see changes over the last 3 months? Because we've got that, instead of just we have the data as it is today. And then in those dashboards, you can have an effectivity slider to say, I want to see all of this data 6 months ago, and then based on that current or load from and to dates, we can use that to say, okay, move back in time 6 months, and now show all of the data as it was at that time.
I guess, just to clarify then, the way you all have implemented it, it's basically every table. Every table is data vaulted, if that's a verb.
Yes, every satellite from every single source system is effectively its own type 2 slowly changing dimension. And then we can determine if we want to project that out into the reporting layer, or if we just want to hold that data, but only project out the current version of the data.
That was basically going to be my question. It was, you mentioned the star schema, and I was curious, is it sort of very consistent patterns for taking the most up to date and just always exposing that as sort of views, or are there things where you're reporting metrics that are sort of inserting what it looked like on that day, so that there is no, if something changes and a metric from 3 months ago changes, does that reflect in the sort of final report, and you have to then show that and explain that, or is it that it's actually materialized as that's what it was on that day, something has changed, now today's uploads, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd say both, but Brandon,
yeah. I completely agree. I think it's both, and it also depends on the business area that you're working in. So accounting, those historical numbers had better not change. So we always use the data for a month close. We lock it on that day, and you're always going to see end of October's data as the way it is. For other areas, marketing, sales, something like that, it's more okay to show historical data that has changed based on current information. So we don't want to send out that, my email was BT123 6 months ago, but now it's changed. So we're going to show more up-to-date information, even if we're looking at a report of who we sent emails to 6 months ago. So it depends a little bit on the business area, the business use case, but you can do both. So that's what's nice. And if they say, actually, I really want to see the data as it was when we sent it. Great, let's project that out.
What's also kind of cool too is we have a staging data warehouse, so we have a production and a staging warehouse. And so as we are automating the data ingestion piece and then also automating the build out of our data vault via dbt macros, we have the ability with being able to stage reports to see what changes to upstream systems will actually do to our data. So we can have our staging looker, for example, and compare what a report would look like based on a change that is staged for an upstream engineering team and compare that to what is currently in production. And so we are now building out the power to compare future changes and be a little bit more future-proof, which has been huge for us.
So I'm trying to understand, because you've said several times now that all of your tables are append only, but then you've also said that they're also all type 2, which type 2, you have to go back and update old rows when they expire. So am I just missing something? Okay.
Yeah, that's for our reporting layer. We project those out as type 2s, but the actual satellites themselves are just append only, add the latest data in. So sorry if I misspoke, but yeah, the dimension, the reporting layer is type 2, and we'll go back and add that valid from, valid to, but the actual satellite object at the data vault is just new record, new timestamp based on hash diff.
Because data vault sits in front of our star schema, if our dimensions and facts really become out of sync in some way, it is totally safe for us to drop them and recreate them to meet new business needs because we have not lost any history. Data vault has all of that, and we can rebuild what we need from data vault.
I'm just curious about the orchestration of what that looks like, of if those, between the data vault and the star schema, or if those are separate runs, separate projects, just kind of what that looks like.
Yes, we leverage dbt, and we have, so we're actually still maintaining our old warehouse. We haven't been able to fully cut over, so we've been maintaining our existing warehouse while building the new data vault warehouse. So we have 2 dbt projects that we manage separately. Our orchestration, we have a dbt project that's managing our existing warehouse and stood up a whole new dbt to manage the data vault. And then from data vault, we have more dbt models that read from data vault into the reporting layer. So we have dbt on every side of the orchestration pipeline, and it's organized with a nice folder structure, and the folder structure matches the schemas that we have in our, so we've configured dbt to kind of dynamically output, right, to whatever schema based on the process it's at.
And it is one project to build data vault
Yeah.
and then that reporting layer. And I have no idea when they're going to kick us out of here, but we can continue this in the hall if we need to.
Yeah, happy to answer all questions.
Are you unable to materialize in your star schema layer? Because the end user, if they're able to select an as of date, I'm just curious how that works, because it's the data vault layer that has the, the history and the from and to date. So I'm just curious, how can you then have on the star schema layer the like variable as of date?
Yeah, could you click back to the
Yep.
dimension, please?
I don't know if that's, let's see if this is working. This one or?
No, the actual table. So our dimensions will have valid from and valid to, and these are coming from that load timestamp in the data vault. The pit table macro that dbt vault has builds this for us just by saying, what are my satellites? What are my primary keys for that satellite? And what we do is we have a common dimensions schema that has all of this information. And then what we'll do is for, let's say, a marketing use case, we would have a specific like star schema in that database, in a different database schema, that's a view looking at this to say, I only want to see current information, so let's filter to is true. Or if I have a report that we want to have this ability to time travel within the actual dashboard, then we'll include all of this information and then use the valid froms and valid tos to give people a way to say, you know, I want to go back in time and see what the data looked like at this point versus current.
I was wondering about the change management of this, and you even mentioned that you haven't been able to fully cut over yet to this new architecture. So I was just curious, like from ideation, you went on the roadshow, you started implementing it. Are there any major like takeaways, pain points, success stories of getting people to use this new architecture? What has kept you from being able to cut over, things like that?
It's been primarily time and that enablement piece that I mentioned. Like, I couldn't just say, hey, we're going to build Data Vault, and then the next day start cutting tickets in Jira for it. So there was a period of just educating the teams on how we're doing this. We also had a little bit of a challenge at first determining what's the right team to build the Data Vault. And we originally had our data warehousing team build both the ingestion pipeline and the Data Vault, and then our reporting team build the facts and dimensions. But we realized there were too many handoffs, so we gave the Data Vault build out back to, or over to that analytics team. I would say true fingers to keyboard development has probably been, what would you say, maybe 6 months since the BI team took that over, and it's just time to get everything built and converted over before we can fully cut over the existing. As far as change management, what we do is as we deliver a dimension, we look through all of our Looker dashboards that have data on like our member dimension, and then transition all of our models to start using that. So it's just been a slow process. As something's delivered and validated, we then say, okay, what all analytics use cases do we have using that could be powered from this, convert them over, and that's when we say that individual project is done.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Brandon and I can both attest that we've been wanting to probably have slightly more progress. But the reality is we still need to ensure that our existing data warehouse can meet business needs, right? So that was really important to our business leaders to say we can do this while also not having any sort of issues. Like, you won't know that this is happening behind the scenes, right? So we've actually had our team split. So we have half the team still working on maintaining business logic, and you kind of have that trade-off of like, okay, so we need to do something now to support the business. It would be great if we could do this in Data Vault, but we kind of need to split the team and still have developers actively maintaining the warehouse, right? So we've had to split a little bit. So it's been about 6 months. We're really starting to make really solid progress. I think, you know, it'll be quick to the end now. I think the part was kind of just figuring out who was doing what, the team splitting, in terms of like these people are focusing primarily on that and really just trying to get that all settled.
And I was told we're having entirely too much fun in here. So I'll be out in the hall. I'm happy to continue answering any questions that any of you have, or if you're a little shy speaking in public, more than happy to chat with you out there. Thank you all again. I really appreciate your time.